Welcome to Style and Glamour with Yolanda's. This show today is so exciting for all of the ladies out there because you're going to really want to hear more and more from this wonderful new author, Justin Locke. It's getting in touch with the inner rich kid, your inner rich kid. And in today's economy, everyone talks money and what they're going to buy and what they're going to do. Justin, welcome so much. It was so interesting to listen to you last week. I had to have you on.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Tell me a little bit. You've been writing books for a while now, but this book has really taken off, and all of you out there are going to want to get a copy. So tell us about how you started. You had 2 books before this.
Oh, you want the whole story? I came to Boston when I was 18 years old. I grew up on a farm, which is kind of key to the whole story here.
Okay.
I grew up at we had a town hall that had an outhouse in the back and a pump in the front. That was the plumbing of the town hall. And we're rustic. We're talking rustic here. And I came to Boston, and I was here for a little over a year, and the phone rang, and I was a bass player. I'd gone to New England Conservatory, and I got the break, and I was playing every gig in town when I was 19.
Wow.
So,
you understand you played with Arthur Fiedler?
I did. The following summer, the phone rang. It was the Boston Pops. I didn't know who Arthur Fiedler was. But hey, it paid money, so off I went to Symphony Hall.
Right.
Actually, the first summer was just Harry Ellis Dixon, but then the next 3 summers, I played the last 3 years of Arthur's life. I actually played his funeral. They had a service in Harvard Square for him, and I was volunteered by the personnel office to go over and play that. So I can actually say I played Arthur's last show.
Wow.
I can say that for sure. So that was kind of how I started off, as just being a bass player. But that in itself was a major culture shock, to go from a rural farm, kind of out in the middle of nowhere to the East Coast at all.
To Symphony Hall.
And then to go into Symphony Hall. So my life is a story of culture shock. And so I did that for 18 years, and I started score reading for the symphony. And my writing actually began, that's another long story, but I was playing a kiddie concert that was very dull and very tasteless.
Right.
And I said, this is a terrible children's concert. It's this terrible story. It's boring. I said, anybody could write a better show than that. I could write a better show than that. And somebody said, well, you're so smart, let's see you do it. And I'd always had a way with words. I've always had a certain talent with writing, but I never thought you could make money at it. That's not something you learn at the Future Farmers of America meetings.
No, right, I'm sure.
It just doesn't come up. I don't know why. You'd think they'd be out there in the tractor, you're writing essays, but apparently not. So I wrote this kids show called Peter versus the Wolf, which is the wolf's trial.
Okay.
And it was just on a dare. This is the story of my life. I just did it on a dare just for fun. And the phone started ringing. People started calling up. Orchestras all over the country were so desperate for something to do on their kiddie concert that they started renting this. And so that became Justin Locke Productions. I became a publisher with that.
Fantastic. But then your very first book was named?
Well, the first book that I actually succeeded at, I wrote a couple of books. I wrote a cookbook for single people. Every recipe served one. Okay. And I still have, I actually had an agent for that. I thought, oh, this publishing's easy. I got an agent right out of the box, and they couldn't sell it. And then I wrote a really bad relationship book that everybody hated. I can't remember some other books. I wrote a Hallmark card book that I sell on Kindle now, but no one buys it. I really went through the ringer of but I wanted to be an author. I had this image in my head. I want to be a writer. I have a nice little house with a picket fence out front and publishers from New York City clamoring for my attention. I thought that would be a great life. So I just kept trying to write. And then I had these people used to ask me, I was in bars, in my health club, and, what do you do? You're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're an accountant. What do you do? Oh, I play the bass with the Boston Pops. And that trumps all other avenues of conversation.
Okay.
What is that really like? And of course, being a farm boy, I'm not going to give you the pretentious press office thing. I just said, well, this is what really happens. And I would start telling these wacky stories of what goes on backstage, because these people are crazy. I love them dearly, but the stress, and they're crazy anyway. So that became I said, I wonder if I could write all these stories down and put it into a book and sell it. And sure enough, people loved the manuscript, and I couldn't find an agent, couldn't find a publisher. I wasted a year and a half of my life looking for a literary agent, and finally I just threw my hands in the air and said, I'm just going to publish this myself. I don't care what happens. And I got an interview on CBS Radio a month later after self-publishing, just fell out of the sky.
Wow.
And I sold out the first printing in like 6 months, and I started printing 300, 500 at a time. And So I've sold thousands of copies of that book, and I still sell them. It's on Kindle now, so it's just
that's great.
flying. I just sold a copy to Brazil yesterday. It just, I can't kill it. But that's the first book. And the second book was, after I'd published that, I said, oh, well, the publishing's easy. I'll do another one. I've become a speaker now. I'm one of those kind of quasi-inspirational.
And you're great at it. You're really great.
Thank you very much. I try to make my audiences happy. And I wanted to take what I'd learned in the context of playing in a major orchestra and share that with people who would never ordinarily know it, because there's a lot of mythology about orchestras, but the way it really works, as in so many businesses, the real inside story, nobody tells you. It's just completely covered up. And I wanted to explain how it was that, there's all these kids want to be orchestral musicians. You know, the success rate is something like 1 in 1,000.
Really?
It's scary when you consider all the music schools we have. And then I can actually calculate the number of openings there are in full-time major orchestras every year in the United States. It is a minuscule number.
And look at you, got in there.
I got in there only as a freelancer. I was not a tenured player. I was a freelance guy, but I'm hanging on by my fingernails. But I managed to do that for 18 years. I still was ahead of 400 or 500 people who wanted that job and couldn't get it. So I wanted to explain that shift from being an also-ran wannabe to going through that. And there is I don't know, call it a membrane, a looking glass. There's something that shifts you from being this to that. And a lot of people just couldn't make that shift. They were so in love with or loyal to that lower way of doing things. It's very safe, but it's not safe on the stage of Symphony Hall. You have to be just, it takes guts.
Of course.
It takes guts to go out there, and it's intimidating. And at some point you have to say, it's not going to be perfect. I cannot be perfect. I have to come out here and do my best and be happy with that. And so you have to accept your frailties and imperfections, which is very hard to do in our culture because we emphasize perfection so much.
Right.
So that being one element of it, you've heard of the Dilbert principle?
Yes,
which is, for those who don't know, the Dilbert principle states, the stupidest people in a company are promoted to management because that's where they can do the least amount of damage.
Okay. Right.
And I thought it would be funny just because I had bumbled into playing Pops. I really bumbled. With my first day at Pop, I didn't know who Arthur Fiedler was. This is what a farm kid I was. And somebody said, oh, Arthur's conducting today, like I was supposed to be impressed. And I just looked at him and said, Arthur who? and everybody laughed. And this made me like, oh, he's one of the gang. We like this kid. I didn't know what I was doing. But
you got the job.
But that helped me stay there because when you walk in, if you could always see the ones who just couldn't handle it. They were so nervous because they had made the Pops into such a big deal in their minds that they couldn't see themselves actually doing it.
So that's how you got the inspiration for that second book,
That second book was very much about, I became a video producer the same way. I didn't know what I was doing, and I just told everybody, I have no idea what I'm doing. And the director of photography said, well, just stand over there and look interested. I'll take it from here. He didn't say that in so many words, but that's what happened. And he did a beautiful job. He did just as good, possibly better of a job than if I had been helping. And in fact, this is one of the secrets of these great conductors, is that they don't tell you how to do it. They stand there and expect you to know.
Okay.
They don't preach to you. They don't teach you. 10 years of working with John Williams, never once did he tell me how to play a note, ever. Ever. This never happened. There was always this look on his face like, well, Justin, you're the best bass player I've ever seen. Can't wait to hear it. What does that do to you? Now you're completely up 100% because you're on the spot. That was the trick. These guys didn't try to be smart. They were constantly emphasizing, I don't know, you're the expert.
Wow.
And that was kind of, but I hadn't put this all together. We just thought, well, these guys are so talented. We used to say, oh, these guys are so talented, but no one knew. And I said, no, there's science to this. And so the book, Principles of Applied Stupidity, just says, well, instead of trying to be smart, what happens if you're dumb, if you just look stupid? And the dumber you look, the more stuff people tell you.
It's amazing.
It's really, and the book was supposed to be a gag. It was supposed to be a joke. I've had CEOs of major corporations tell me it's the best business book they've ever read. It was just...
It's great.
Well, it just looks at human nature from a very pragmatic viewpoint.
But it seems like, thinking of the books you've written, getting now in touch with your inner rich kid.
Oh, we should talk about that a little bit.
That's amazing because it's almost brought you to this book. I mean, you're getting in touch, like you were saying, you didn't know, but you looked good, and now all of a sudden, what about the rich kid?
Well, I should tell the story of this book. This book has been 40 years in the making. When I was 15, again, growing up on that farm, and people yell at me, Justin, you're talking about the farm too much. But the farm is me. There's soybeans in
you grew up that way,
in my pockets. I can show you the soybeans. We actually played in soybean trucks. This was like the fun day when they harvested the soybeans. I have a crazy childhood. Nobody grows up on farms anymore. But when I was 15, I'll cut away from the drama that occurred at that time. I got a scholarship to go to the local rich kid college prep private high school.
You did?
Yes.
That's amazing.
And it was just, I mean, had low enrollment that year, and I was a good student. It's just I was bored at the old school, and this was a nasty public school. It was dangerous. I got beaten up a lot. Bullies.
Because you were a poor kid?
I was I was the nerd kid.
Okay.
So that kind of made me a target. So I was constantly afraid whenever I went to school. And the classes were incredibly boring. They would teach us stuff, and then they would go back and teach it to us again because they assumed we'd forgotten it all. And so, of course, now you just don't care. And that's one of the chapters of the book. But anyway, I went from this poor kid school to rich kid school. I mean, one day I was in this environment, and the next day I was in another one. Again, culture shock. This is the story of my life. It was like going from a prison to a country club.
Wow.
It's still a school.
Right.
It's still a school. Schools got desks and hallways and lockers and teachers and classes. But the environment, the atmosphere was completely different. And at the time, it totally traumatized me. I didn't know how to talk to these rich kids. I couldn't understand their culture. I didn't fit in. I mean, their reference to life was completely different. And I always wanted to write a book about that experience just because I was so traumatized by it.
Of course.
But then I sat down, I wrote a version of this book, and it stunk. It was really bad, because it was just me doing therapy. It was not for anyone else to read. But I said, there's something in this. And I realized that, and this gets back to the Pops reference point, in the world of major orchestras, there's this handful of conductors that always got great results, that always came out, and the orchestra snapped to attention. And then there were all the people who wanted to be conductors. There was no middle. There was always this fabulous conductors, and there was like tolerable down to terrible. But there was no such thing as an almost great conductor. Oh, if he'd just do a little like that, he'd be a great conductor. It never happened. Not even close. They either had it or they didn't. It was black, white, it was
right.
north, south. And this is the big discovery. I'll save it to the end. But as I looked at these kids, I realized that the emotional polarity, and I talk now a lot about the what I call the periodic table of emotional energy, because we've done the Human Genome Project of our genes. Why not do our emotional energy as well? No one has cataloged this.
No, that's right.
So this is my thing now, trying to explain to people how emotions work. Because in the music business, that's all we do is think about specific emotional energy.
Right.
So this is my training, and I realized that in the poor kids school, they were training us to be poor. It wasn't conscious because all the people teaching us had been trained to be poor, and they're very loyal to the system. So, for example, the first thing I talk about is the trust issue. Because in the poor kids school, we were in lockdown all the time. You were in study hall. If you wanted to leave the study hall, you needed a pass that had to be approved by somebody. They had guards in the hallways making sure you had a pass. There was no trust of anybody in that environment. This was normal to me. This was how the world worked to me. I just assumed that you can't trust anybody. That's the constant message in the poor kid school. In the rich kid school, there were no study halls. Now imagine someone who's used to being in constant lockdown all the time, suddenly you can do what you want.
Right,
your
that's
time's
amazing.
your own.
Yes.
I didn't know what to do. I've never been trusted before.
To study when you wanted to.
Maybe I should go burn down the building. I think that's what they thought we would do if they took their eyes off us. Am I supposed to go burn down the building now? I didn't know what to do. And I was looking for the study hall. Where's the study? These rich kids looked at me and goes, why would you study in a hall? It was that foreign to them that you would have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. If they needed to go to the bathroom, they just got up and walked out. and they came back when they felt like it. And hey, they're paying customers. It was so, can you understand how traumatizing this was? Because you people are doing things you're not supposed to be doing. You'll get, we were physically beaten. We had paddlings when I was in school. If you talk back to a teacher, you would be physically beaten.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a frightening thing to think about. You know, there's a lot of darkness in that. But anyway, getting back to the book, I said, again, I start books with one idea and I just watch them grow. It's not like I know what the book is before I write it. And I started experimenting with this. Okay, is there different polarities, not just the trust issue? And I started to discover that there are these polarities of emotional energies. Trust is one. We have trust at one end, mistrust at the other. You know, if you trust somebody a lot and now you don't trust them,
right,
you can't get back to neutral anymore. Now you're in mistrust mode and you never want to see him again. And I started to catalog, okay, there's poor kids have a lot of resentment. Rich kids, I saw no resentment in them. They had...
Well, they had it all. I mean, there's no reason to resent.
Exactly. And so, but that affects how you look at the future. Because resentment has no respect for time or space. And you start to expect that you will have resentment tomorrow because you had it today, which means you're probably not going to get what you want tomorrow either.
But you know, it's interesting. When I read this book and I went through it, there were so many great chapters, you know, the benefits of being poor, for example. And then I started thinking about my own life and what I went through with my mom. And I remember my mom, we came from a very poor beginning, similar to yours, not on a farm, but very similar. The end of an alleyway, near a junkyard, you know, we had no bathroom facilities or anything. It was really tough. But I remember as we grew and we started to get ahead, and Mom and Dad did, I started buying her some beautiful things when I went to work, and she never wore them. And I said, what happened to that beautiful white sweater with the pearls, Mom? And she felt like she didn't deserve it. She always felt she was still poor, even though they had come a long way. And I think that out of this book, what I got about getting in touch with your inner rich kid, like we're not always going to be poor.
Exactly. And what you're talking about, this is the syndrome, and we should address this, is that just because you have cash, being rich isn't a number. It's not a number. It's not an amount of money. It's an attitude and a feeling. My mother used to say this all the time. She was a junk dealer. She said, money is emotion. People express their emotions with money. That's all it is. And as I say in the book, it's really mostly about desire. Nothing has intrinsic value. It only has value because somebody wants it. And if nobody wants it, there is no value in it. That you can't separate the desire from the money, because money doesn't really exist even. Only 15% of the money in the world, or the American money, exists in any tangible form. The rest of it is just numbers in a computer someplace. But what you're talking about, and this address, the book has really resonated with female readers, which surprised me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I loved it, and it's easy reading. It's wonderful. I mean, it really puts your whole mindset another way, because you start thinking, I guess I have value. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's like people who were poor felt they had no value.
Well, that's really why you're poor.
Okay.
I mean, there's a cause and effect here, that your emotions about how you feel about yourself will affect what you think. Will other people want you? That's what you're worth. And if you think nobody wants you, well, you're not worth much. That's the emotion. It's not a number that somebody keeps on a card in a file someplace. It's all about that desire. And if you think about women in America, I had no sympathy for the women's rights and the sexual revolution, etc., because I'm a guy. So of course that's just, you know, how does this help me, the women complaining about wanting more money? I had no sympathy for this because I didn't understand it till I wrote this book. Then I understood that women are an oppressed class. There are many oppressed classes. I was a member of, I mean, a white male, but I was still a member of an oppressed class because I lived in this town and my parents made X amount of dollars. So I went without a lot of things. And then I was amongst these kids who weren't the oppressed class.
Right, they could get whatever they wanted.
But with all the gains that women have made, if you don't have to go back very far to a grandmother who you love dearly and you're loyal to their system and their morals and their values, they were a second-class citizen. They couldn't vote, couldn't get a job unless it was a menial task or specifically nursing or teaching or a librarian or something like, but come on, the idea that you could climb the corporate ladder was impossible for the rank and file person. And even today, that legacy, that cultural legacy of your class, of what you are worth as a person in society, we're constantly having this played with. And this is something that I work now in terms of the, coming back again to my Pops experience, it was all about manipulating emotional energy. John Williams, worked with this guy for 10 years, well, longer than that. And you can't sit through a John Williams music movie without having your emotions being twisted and turned this way and that way. He was a master at emotional manipulation, and I saw how this was possible to do. Not just in music, but a good writer can do it, a good actor can do it. And I think as a culture right now, we have become emotionally illiterate. And what happens is it becomes very easy to manipulate and exploit people. And that's what happened to me as a poor kid. My emotions and my desire to be accepted, it was all being exploited and to push me into this job working in a factory in Toledo, Ohio. That was the expectation of all the, the poor kids. So when I went to the rich kids' school, these kids had different expectations. And so what I wanted to do in the book is say, okay, there's these polarities. I'm getting back to this concept. You're in this emotional polarity over here. There's no reason to be in that. You can take that exact same energy. If you're worrying about the future, all that energy you put into worry,
we all do.
You
Sure.
sit there and you're just grinding and all this, you're actually, your guts are just churning. You can take that same energy and turn it into giddy expectation that something wonderful is going to happen. And what am I going to do when I have $2 million? Oh my gosh, because that's worrying, but it's the positive form of it.
Right.
And if you start thinking that way, you affect your environment. It's almost instantaneous how it works. It's just, and again, emotional energy is what is what the world runs on. I mean, this is really what makes everything go.
It's funny when you say, like your chapters, like, what is money anyway? I think about the need and the want, as you said, the desire. When I had my boutique years ago, I'd have this fabulous dress that I couldn't understand why it didn't sell. It was beautiful, the price was right, and it just didn't sell. Because when the one person, maybe 2 years later, saw it, wanted it, regardless of what the price was, I didn't have to discount it because they wanted it. It's just like you said.
Exactly.
The desire, if it's there, is there something for everyone? And this book tells us so much about getting in touch with who you really are and making yourself feel rich.
Well, it's also about understanding that nobody is born poor. Nobody is born. There's no such thing as a 3-week-old baby that is saying to itself, I'm hungry, I need to be changed, but do I really deserve it?
I never thought of that.
Can I trust anybody to do it right? Maybe I'll just sit here and put up with what I got because maybe there aren't any more diapers. There's a limited amount of everything. Maybe this is the only, I don't want to use any more diapers because there's only so many diapers in the house. So let's just stick with, no, this doesn't happen. You have to train people to think, the 4 pillars of poverty thinking are there limited amounts of everything. The world is a negative place. I can't remember off the top of my head. What else? Well, you'll have to read the book to get the rest of it. But it was kind of like I said, this is trauma. This is emotional trauma that you get from not getting what you want. And for the most part, I also want to point out that most people want the same thing, which is we want to be connected.
Right,
This
exactly.
is the number one thing.
And accepted.
And accepted. It's all about social cohesiveness. This is what wealth really is. When you talk about having a lot of money, that's what people buy with the money, is that, because that's what they really want. That's what being rich is.
Okay.
I mean, Ebenezer Scrooge, was he rich at the beginning of the story? No, he had tons of money, but he was miserable. I know so many rich people who are broke. I mean, they got all this cash, and there's a whole chapter devoted to that, poor people with cash.
Right, it's amazing. I mean, the book is such a great read.
Thank you.
I mean, I recommend it to every woman because, especially men too, but women especially, because so many women do not feel their worth. And I hear it all the time. They'll buy for the kids, for their husband, for their grandchildren. But when it comes to them, like, oh, I'll just have what I have. It's like they don't deserve it. I don't understand why. But this is one of the things that I really got out of this book.
Well, I was talking to one woman who makes a lot of money at her job. And she said, well, women have been, trained to nurture. Our job is to nurture.
True. Okay.
And now that word tends to mean, well, you're going to give things to other people.
Okay.
Which implies that you're going to end up with nothing since you're giving everything away. Why can't you get paid for nurturing? Why is nurturing worth less money than, I don't know, making widgets on a line? I think nurturing is important. I like nurturing. I would like to tell you that your nurturing is worthless so I can get all of it for cheap. Now you see how the exploitation of the emotion comes in there, because we're all eager to be accepted. And this is really important. If you look at like these drug ads, I'm always down on these drug companies doing these ads. You never see the pill. You never see like somebody with a terrible disease taking the pill in the ad. What you see is somebody playing with their grandchildren, or there's a face of someone looking at you like you're my new best friend. it's all, if you turn off the sound, it's this wonderful feeling of community and connection, which has nothing to do with the chemicals in the pill or the symptoms of the disease, which are disgusting to hear about, and all the side effects.
Right.
But you hear all that, which is legally, you're like, well, if you take this, you may have nightmares and suicidal thoughts and itchy feet. But what you're seeing is, oh, I'm going to be able to play with my grandchildren on a beautiful beach and, you know, down in South Carolina. It's just going to be so wonderful. Because and beer ads, you never see the beer. You see the gorgeous babe in the bikini. And that's what the guy wants. You know, we want the connection. Oh, and if you drink the right brand of beer, you know, you'll get the gorgeous babe behind the bar. Yeah, there's always a personal connection element, because that's what we want.
Well, you know, I wish we had a whole hour, because you were so amazing. What's next for you? I mean, this is such a wonderful read, and really emotionally, it really gets you interested more and more about what else you're going to write. I want to know. You're just amazing. What's next for you?
Well, right now I'm just trying to, you know, spread the gospel, you know, and I'm hoping, you know, the Fortune 500 companies will catch on to this emotional literacy message that I'm sharing.
Well, you'd be great for their companies. I mean, now you do speaking, so you do speaking engagements. Be great for companies to hire you to come in and.
Well, they do. I mean, this is something that I do normally. It's just, but I'm here just to promote it, you know, because hey, you know, call me up. This is all I do.
That's great.
The next book I'm thinking. It's called Manipulating the Masses for Fun and Profit. And I'm a big fan of Machiavelli. He's been derided in history, but this guy was a political genius. And we don't really understand how the average person is not, we all learn in these silos of very specific skills. And we don't teach what used to be called the classics, which was really emotional literacy. All those stories of the mythical Roman gods were about our own emotional foibles. So what I wanted to do is talk about, okay, if you want to manipulate people with an advertisement or whatever, how would you do that? What is the science and the basic fundamentals of, you know, getting people to hate one political candidate and love another one?
Oh, it's amazing, yeah.
And there is a science to it. It's not just people just guessing. There's very much of, okay, this is going to get this result. It's scientific. It's no longer just art. Although there is an art to it, but that's when it's kind of like the subtle nuances. But I'm thinking about something like that. But right now, I mean, just this book alone, I'm still in the launch mode.
Right.
Because as a self-publisher, I have to go out and promote it. And
so they can get in touch with you through your website, which
absolutely.
is?
JustinLocke.com. That's Locke with an E, JustinLocke.com.
And they can order the books online?
Yes, I sell them through my website. You can also get them all on Kindle, if you prefer that.
Right.
So it doesn't matter to me either or.
And you do autograph them, which
I
so
autograph
excited.
books. If people buy them through my website, I will write notes and autograph and everything else. You know, I really put the self in self-publisher here. I mean, it's really
right.
It's a shop where I run it. It's not like, you know, just some person you've never seen before. And because again, it's all about connection. It's all about connection, and people have that connection experience. They buy the book, you know.
Well, I want to thank Rotary in Waltham, because that's how I met you, and listening to you that day was so inspirational for me and brought back so many stories about being a poor kid that really brought me to this point to meet you. And I'm going to look forward to more of your books. And anyone looking and wanting to know more about Justin Locke, make sure you go on to his website, watch for him, because you're going to really be delighted with reading this. It's an easy read, fun, and really inspirational. So thanks so much, Justin. We'll look forward to seeing you soon on YouTube and here at Channel.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming.